some interesting stuff coming from Eagles OTAs today, as typically happens. Jim Schwartz spoke today. Also, Mike Groh, the new offensive coordinator. We'll dive into some news and notes from Eagles OTAs with John McMullen here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Johnny Mac, welcome back, pal.
How are you guys?
Doing well, bud.
Yeah, man. And, I guess, Schwartz spoke today. We'll get into some of the things that he had to say. And Groh, who spoke for the first time as the offensive coordinator. So there's a lot of news and notes. You have a piece about the standouts there at the practice today. But maybe the most surprising piece of news from Eagles OTAs today comes from Nick Foles, who essentially said, hey, the team, I don't know anything about this Cleveland deal.
Yeah, so, I mean, that part doesn't surprise me. That's what I said on the show. I find it very hard to believe that if the Eagles did get that offer, they would run it by Nick Foles and then turn it down because Nick said he didn't want to go to Cleveland. Now, it's conceivable they would have run it by him because they have tremendous respect for him and said, look, this is what we're thinking about doing. But they certainly weren't going to turn down anything because the player didn't want to go somewhere. That's just not how the NFL works. It's just not how professional sports works. And Nick confirmed that part of it from his perspective. He claimed the first he heard of that was when he was texted about it after the story broke on NFL.com. So from his perspective, he certainly didn't turn down any deal. Whether the Eagles got that offer and turned it down for other reasons, as Howie Roseman has said time and time again, it starts at a first-round pick. So if they did turn it down, it's because they wanted to turn it down.
Now, was he asked, I see your video at J.F. McMullen, the scrum in front of Nick Foles' locker today discussing the Browns trade rumor. Was he followed up with, if they came to you, would you have approved a deal of that magnitude?
No, he kind of said at the end of that video, you can see I'm a player, and he knows he doesn't have any control over that aspect of it. So from that point, it's just the reality of you kind of know this is a business. And I think, Nick has seen the other side of the fence from his time with the Rams and kind of understands that although it would be nice to be a starting quarterback in this league, it has to be in the right situation if you want to have long-term success. So I think he understands that, but I think he also understands that's out of his control, and that's out of the control of any player, really. If they have value and the team wants to spin you off, they can spin you off, and that's ultimately where the Eagles are with Nick Foles.
Now, he's running the first team, obviously, but Wentz do a lot today or anything? You see him around? Because last week he looked pretty good.
Yeah, he did the same as he did in the first practice we were in, worked during individual drills, even kind of mixed in with some throwing drills. Didn't look as good as he did last week, which was indoors. It doesn't surprise me. You have some ebbs and flows to these types of injuries and rehabs. And I continue to be amazed at how much he's doing, which is we're basically a little over 5 months post-surgery. And I start to question, what is the need for this, to be honest? I think they're going too fast. And I think a lot of it has to do with Carson and his competitiveness and his want to be out there. And I really think they got to pull the reins because Jim Schwartz kind of talked about it today. He wasn't talking about Carson. He's talking about veteran players in general. We're talking about healthy veteran players. The offseason is about teaching. It's about getting reps for the young guys. It's about getting them up to speed and then training campus for evaluation. I don't think he needs to do all this, and I think at some point the Eagles have to have a conversation, kind of slow him down a little bit.
John McMullen on with us here on the Sports Bash as the Eagles continue their OTA work. Now, Groh today had some interesting comments when asked about what his approach to the offense was. In fact, he said, it's not my offense, it's Doug's offense. So what do you think that he can add? What do they lose with Frank Reich no longer around?
Well, they lose some presence. I thought, Mike's first press conference certainly wasn't as commanding, and he had to, follow Jim Schwartz, who's been a head coach in this league. So I think he's going to grow into the role, and we'll see how it works out. I think this is maybe the biggest storyline of this season. I know everyone talks about the players, and understandably so, but I talk about it all the time. The Eagles lost two really, really good coaches. One of them, obviously, Frank Reich, the former offensive coordinator who worked so well with Doug Peterson. And we're just going to have to see how this works out with Mike Groh being elevated, and because this is a big leap. This is a role. He's going from receivers coach to offensive coordinator. Now, he has quarterback in his background, and obviously that's why he got the job. And he mentioned today he looks at the game and he always has, from a quarterback's perspective. So I think there's an opportunity for him to grow in the role, but I think it is going to be growing into the role. I don't think he's going to be Frank Reich right out of the gate.
And then, of course, you said receivers coach to offensive coordinator. There were some new faces out there today, a chance to look at, say, the Mike Wallace of the world and some of the guys. It's hard. What can you really learn from the OTAs? And yet Mac Hollins, Mike Wallace, the new tight end, all looked good. I saw your tweets with video of these guys performing in OTAs.
Yeah, I think as I said, you take it more seriously with the younger players because it's important for them for a number of reasons. To gain confidence, they get extra reps. This is the time you can teach when you get sort of into the regular season and you get into regular season mode. It's always about planning for the next opponent. And there isn't a ton of time with all the practice limitations to teach all that much. So this is the time where they have to get these guys up to speed. I think with veteran players, you kind of know what they are, you kind of know what they can do, and you like them to do certain things to make sure they stay in shape and they're ready when training camp rolls around. But you start looking at some of these younger players. We mentioned with Sidney Jones last week, Devontae Bosby today playing in the slot with the first team. That's going to be one of the stories of the offseason, who they get to replace Patrick Robinson. And Dallas Goedert, he was really impressive today. And you just see the dynamic that they potentially could have with him and Zach Ertz at the same time, because they're essentially the same guy physically. They're just so long. And you see the Eagles safeties trying to defend a player like Goddard, and they're just too small. And if a quarterback can be accurate and throw the football where only Goddard or Ertz can catch it, that's a matchup nightmare.
One more on Groh before we leave the offensive side of the football, John. Did he get into the dynamic and his relationship with Doug and being like how that's going to work moving forward? Was there a lot asked of him about just changing roles? It's a little bit different if you're the wide receivers coach to, the playbook's going to be on you, the responsibility to get the plays in go through you. It's certainly a step up. Did he get into that dynamic at all?
Yeah, a little bit. I think that, too, is also a work in progress. They haven't even decided, for instance, if Mike is going to be up in the booth on game days or down on the sidelines. So they're still, it's very early. It's May. They're still discussing all these types of things. I think one of the positives is this is Doug Peterson's offense, obviously. So this is an offensive-minded head coach as an offensive coordinator. It's not an offensive coordinator who has to call the plays. So I think there's an opportunity for him to grow into the role. But this is a big leap because we talk about, Frank leaving. If Frank left and John DeFilippo didn't get another job, John would be the offensive coordinator right now. But John left to call plays in Minnesota. So you have this tremendous sort of two-pronged leap from Mike Groh. Going over the two closest coaches to Doug Peterson from last season. So it is going to be an adjustment.
How did they run it before? When you said upstairs or down, what do you think's best suited for him, and how has it worked in the past?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. That really depends on the coach and how they kind of see the game. And a lot of guys like to be up high if they can, because they feel they can get a better viewpoint. And some like to be down with the players and get a feel from it from that perspective. The fact that Doug is going to call the plays, I think, kind of limits it either way. I think it would be more important if Mike was actually calling the plays, but this is Doug Peterson's offense, and rightfully so.
So I saw a lot on Twitter, John, a lot of complimentary perspective on Nate Sudfeld. And we've talked a lot about Nick Foles here, about when we're looking at the offense at the quarterback position. But what about Nate? If he had a good preseason, could he be a trade piece before the season?
No, I don't think so, because Nate's unproven. The Eagles like him a lot. Maybe you could spin him off for a late round pick because people are desperate for quarterbacks in this league, always, and certainly backup quarterbacks. But the reason Nick is trade bait is because he's got value and significant value, and the Eagles think first round value. I don't know if that's the case, but if we believe the report about the Browns, at least number 35 overall value, and that's still significant. Whereas a guy like Nate, even though the Eagles think he's very promising, he's nowhere obviously near as an unproven player. You could really talk about that kind of value. So I don't know why they would spin him off, because they think he could be more than just, say, a fifth or sixth round pick.
Talking with John McMullen here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Flip over to defense. Jim Schwartz, he's always interesting when he speaks. He's always got something to say. But one thing that you pointed out was about Sidney Jones, and kind of interested. I think he's really a key figure in the OTAs, the training camp, and everything. I think everybody's going to have their eye on how they're going to use this guy because, John, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a possibility the Eagles might have taken this guy in the first round had he been healthy. They were thrilled to get him in the second round. I mean, this is like adding a first-round pick to your team this season. So we're all wondering, how did they view Sidney Jones? Because at this time last year, not having that guy with that secondary was, wow, now the secondary is almost the strength of the team.
Yeah, and we kind of talked about that in the past, how it could quickly change if some of these guys develop. And then they also brought in Ronald Darby in trade, and sure enough, it has developed like that. And now it's sort of, how do you get him on the field? Because you can't take Mills off, you can't take Darby off, and if he's not suited for the slot, and I think somebody, by the way, with his talent, you don't want him in the slot long term, because if you have a shutdown corner, you want him defending the best wide receivers on the opposition. And those guys are going to be playing outside the numbers more often than not. So that's ultimately down the road where you want Sidney Jones. But you're right. I mean, if you talk to most NFL scouts, there's no question Sidney Jones was rated as a higher prospect than Derek Barnett. So a healthy Sidney Jones would have been in that 10 to 20 range in the NFL draft, and the Eagles could have taken him number one. So he's going to be on the field. It's just a matter of where. And Jim said today that's what they're going to do in the offseason. That's what he mentioned with teaching. They're going to roll guys in and out to that slot cornerback spot to try to figure out the best option. And last Tuesday when we were there, Sidney Jones was there. And he mentioned when you guys weren't there, he wasn't in there because he's rolling guys. And today it was Devontae Ballsby. And it might be somebody else tomorrow. But if Sidney Jones lives up to his skill set, his talent level, the Eagles are going to find a way to get him on the field.
And you mentioned, guys who aren't there. One who's not going to be there is Michael Kendricks. Did Jim Schwartz offer anything on that topic?
Well, he, as he usually does, Jim defers to Doug and Howie when it comes to personnel matters. But we all know why Michael Kendricks is here. He's not here. He was too expensive to be a third linebacker who only plays 25% of the snaps. It worked out well last season when Jordan Hicks went down and he stepped into a 3-down role and performed very, very well. But as I said, if all things go to plan, he wasn't scheduled to play a lot. And you simply can't pay a linebacker who doesn't play a lot what the Eagles were scheduled to pay Michael Kendricks. Problem is, Paul Warlow's gone for the season. So the Eagles made a conscious decision. They knew Michael Kendricks wasn't going to be here, either via trade or via release, as it ended up being. That's why they went out and they signed Corey Nelson and they signed Paul Warlow. Unfortunately, first day of OTAs, Warlow's lost for the season. So I think that's the biggest issue. If an injury does happen to Nigel Bradham or Jordan Hicks, you no longer have that safety net of Michael Kendricks. It's not going to be good because there's nobody on this team that can fill that role.
John McMullen covering the Eagles at OTAs. Of course, you can follow him at JF McMullen for the video from today's practice and post, locker room stuff with Nick Foles. It's all follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen and get his Eagles practice reports at 97.3ESPN.com.
Including, John, a video today. Could you maybe shed some light on what was going on this ring around the posy drill? You had the kick returners. I mean, literally, it's like ringing around the posy, and then all of a sudden the guy pops out and says, okay, I'm going to field the punt now. Fair catch. Here I go.
It was a ring around the rosy.
It was interesting because they were doing a return drill, and it would just be all the returners, sort of like Pete mentioned, ringing around the rosy, and then all of a sudden Deuce Staley would yell out a number, and that person would have to come out and catch the football that was already in the air. So it was an interesting little wrinkle, and obviously you want to make sure the first thing any special teams coach, and Dave Phipp will tell you this time and time again, before you talk about the explosiveness of a Darren Sproles or somebody like that as a punt returner, the first thing you got to do is be secure catching the football. And otherwise, you can't be a returner. So it was an interesting way to get them to be sure-handed doing that.
Had you seen that before?
I had not. That's why I kind of a lot of times you have to understand that there's 3 practice fields at the NovaCare complex, and a lot of times they try to go away from us to let us not see as much as possible. So you can't always get up close on certain drills. So I'm not going to say they've never done it before because Dave has been here for a while. But I personally had never seen it before.
All right, Johnny Mac's got more on the Eagles, of course, and the NFL at JF McMullen. GetMoreSports.com for all his NFL coverage and the Eagles coverage at 97.3 ESPN.com. All right, John, more Eagles OTAs tomorrow, correct?
Correct. We're not there, but they're OTAs all week.
All right, pal. We'll talk.
All right.